have a video archive as well, which is nice. Okay, I think we're good. Juggling lots. Okay, so I did set up my speakeasy, so this should be a little bit easier. And Lear, if you can hear me, whenever you want, if you want to sit up, and I'll prompt you for when we talk about the prototype piece. So let's see if I can kind of hold with speakeasy too.
I'm here. Sorry, Val was asking me something.
That's all right. Perfectly fine.
Created the speakeasy for my part too, by the way.
Woohoo! Yeah. So okay, let me. There we go. So today, as we talked about, we're kind of doing this a bit as a presentation, and then also, if we have some time, hopefully a little bit of brainstorming. Revolving around using technology to connect people to the arts. And really this comes from the Knight Foundation, which opened up a grant call last month. And they're looking for individuals or organizations or companies or anybody to submit ideas on how technology can be used to connect people to the arts. And again, I said, it is open to anybody. We'll kind of get into more of the specifics of it, and then we'll kind of sort of sort some questions too along the way. The slides are available at that URL, which are the ones you're seeing here, which were made on Canva, so link to last week. So again, Knight Foundation, it's their Knight Prototype Fund. Arts and Technology is what this falls under. Let me change the slide as well. And it's an open call for ideas to explore the digitally driven approaches that galleries, museums, performing arts centers, theaters, and arts organizations of all genres might use to inspire audiences. And you don't actually have to be part of an arts, like a higher level arts org. You don't even have to be part of an arts org if you've got an idea for a technology or tool or process that could help the arts. But when they say arts, that's what they are talking about. So ultimately, whatever you're creating, even if it has a broader applicability, has to kind of benefit those realms. So let's kind of go over the opportunity overview. So the Knight Prototype Fund, which helps people quickly develop and test early stage ideas. So this is a subset of they have this prototype fund that they have. Often they are only targeting certain states in the country. So this is actually an open to all over the US. So and I'll have that later on in another slide. But it's all of the country rather than just certain states. So, and the goal is to accelerate technology development in the arts, learn from experiments, and share lessons within the field. And overall, there is a fund of $1 million that they're going to be putting at this, with an average grant size of $50,000 for each project. So you're looking at about 20 projects that will get picked at the end. And the deadline to submit your idea is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on March 6th. So, which is why we're presenting it today, because that's this coming week. So get your ideas out. Tuesday, indeed. The good thing is, and I don't think that actually is in any of the slides, but you can submit multiple ideas. So the same person can submit multiple ideas. And yes, they're informal. Lear will kind of fill in that stuff as we go. So they have a and I lost a bullet. They have a commitment to oh, and here's the link before we go on to the next slide. That is the link actually to the Knight Foundation's call for proposal post. So you can go there, and that is also the link. You can link. There's a link from there on applying as well. So and oh, and this is the video too. I forgot about this as well. This is the video Q&A. They did a Q&A session a couple weeks ago, and if you're a lot of the notes and things that I'm putting across today on the slides come from that Q&A, things that they said directly there. But if you want to watch the full Q&A, you can go there to watch that. So okay, now back to the slides. So they have a commitment to open knowledge, and which so they actually have a mandate in their foundational charter. So the idea of something for their funding going towards open knowledge or methodologies or software that can be shared via Creative Commons or open source. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about ideas, that really they're looking for technology that can be shareable either via Creative Commons or open source. You can have a for-profit idea, but your Knight Foundation work must be open and shareable. And you also should be asking yourself, does what you are making help connect people to the arts, as we were talking about before, where arts means that broader scope of the sort of more specific list of arts, um, and um, and also with this nod of looking at what do you hope to learn or learn in the next phase of the project. So they will fund, say, something that is partway through or that already has sort of started. It doesn't have to be a brand new idea, and they could be sort of funding the next phase of it. And here's just some of the logistical stuff for the process. You can apply at prototypefund.org. Or that link that I gave earlier also links to that same page, which has the link to the application. And you'll fill out a simple application. It's about 6 questions with about a 200-word count limit for each one. And they're asking you things. And let me let me skip back to this. They're asking you things like, what do you want to make? Who is it for? What is your hypothesis? Who is involved in making it? So your team or your partners, the people you're collaborating with. And this is kind of an overview of what their grant process is. So the Knight Foundation expects, and they were kind of roughing it. They expect about 500 plus applications that they'll get in, and that may be more because of the idea that people can submit multiple entries. So then they will narrow down to semifinalists who get interviewed, and then about 20 grant-winning projects will be chosen, as we talked about before, and they each will have that average budget of about $50,000. And then the final winners are actually asked for a budget at that point. So as Lear was saying, it's a pretty simple application, and it's really pretty informal initially, and then they kind of, rather than a lot of other grant proposals that are very specific right off the bat, asking you for who's involved, listing everyone, their roles, the budgets, all that other stuff, they're kind of actually only then asking these things once they get later in the process. So you don't have to worry about any of that stuff now, about any of the specific numbers. Oops, wrong button. And then they will bring together winners to go through the human-centered design and innovation training, which we've talked before here about design thinking. In some ways, the human-centered design is similar to that really at the end of it, they're trying to impact people directly with whatever technologies they're creating. So they'll bring folks together for this training workshop where they go over that, and then innovation training as well. So it's not only an interesting project if you get chosen, you get to get some money to help prototype your idea, but you'll actually get to learn some skills, or sort of beef up your and learn human-centered design and innovation training, which is great. So you can think of it as that too. Yes, yay learning. Oops, sorry. I keep swapping between my speakeasy button and my slide button. So grant winners will have access to a 9-month sprint. So that's basically the project timeline. It's a 9-month sprint, and in this case, sprint means, and I'm sure Lear will get into it when we talk about prototype a bit more, but it's just that time frame and to work on your prototypes. And then at the end of that, they will bring back people to show off what was made and share lessons learned. So again, it goes back to that, even if the project didn't get to where you wanted to be, like at that end of that 9 month, they bring everybody back and they figure out what is shareable from there, whether that be actual technology or some lessons learned or any of those kind of things. So neat in the fact that it's really about kind of learning and sort of trying to figure out if your assumptions are correct in so. And then I'll just say this a little bit to kind of pose what Knight is thinking about on regards to prototyping, and then Lear can kind of jump in with a bit more in depth about prototyping. So in essence, prototypes is how to test, or in their case, they're looking at how can we test your ideas quickly. So that's why these funds are small and focused on trying to these early stages of an idea. So they bring, as we said, they'll bring folks together, the winners, to go through human-centered design and innovation training and to learn the process to connect you and the audience and answer questions on what is important for your users to build. In essence, to make the right things for humans that apply to this technology towards the arts theme. Iteration and idea changes during the process is okay. So if you start off with one idea, or you think what will be the idea and that changes along the way through that 9 month phase, that is okay. So there's no having to worry about sticking specifically to the T to your idea if that isn't going to work in the end. So and then again, as we said, they bring people back to show off what was made and to share that learning. And they're open to failure, which is an important piece of learning that is often kind of shied away from. But it's okay if your assumptions don't work, as long as there are lessons learned. Yes, yeah, this is definitely very cool that the Knight Foundation, for those who aren't familiar with them, normally their funding goes towards news and civic engagement, but they do have sort of sub things that relate to the arts field and some other things. But often they have a lot of challenges that are focused around civic engagement, kind of applying data to news fields or those sort of things. So this one falls within the way that they often do some of their challenges, but is a lot more open and a lot more flexible than they normally are. So, and Lear, if you want to kind of talk a bit more about that whole general level for prototyping, I'll kind of leave it here for now.
Certainly. Gentle, this is for you. I wrote this out as you were talking about your topic, because I am not a morning person, as we both know. So today we're talking about the prototyping for the Knight Foundation. And what do we mean by a prototype, right? Well, when I think of low-fidelity prototypes, I'm thinking about informal designs. I'm thinking about drawing on a napkin over lunch. See, often people tell me, I could never do that. And I go, how often do you draw on a napkin or draw on the back of an envelope? In fact, it used to be called back of the envelope design. It actually had a name. and of course, geeks like me who don't draw, right, loved it because we could capture our ideas, we could share with friends, we could brainstorm and tinker, we could scribble, and unlike Rhiannon, those of us who can't draw a straight line were able to participate, right? Because we're not artists, we're idea people, right? And so we used them for user interfaces. And if you want to think about the user interface, think about software. Okay, what does it look like? What does this interface look like for virtual worlds, right? So, you could even have a project that said, like Selby could have a project, because he mentioned earlier that he was doing a design. He could have one that looked at his web worlds and said, what should the interface look like if I had all the time, money, and talent in the world? What could I do, right? What might it look like? And he could be drawing it out for his web worlds as opposed to how it currently works. Maybe he loves the way it currently works, but maybe he wants to do it differently or involve other people, right? So it's developing a solution that does not see, our goal is to develop solutions that fit people, and developing one that does not fit is often a waste of time, right? So we use these prototypes to test the interface features, to look at common tasks. We ask people to perform them, and then we observe them. We watch them as they behave and perform the task, and we think about, oh, you like to right-click, you left-click, you do this, whatever, right? And we capture that information. And then we think about, okay, how do we design things that fit people? And I'm thinking about software, but you guys could be thinking about your social good programs, your agencies, the things you do, right? And then how you involve people, creating customized designs or customized experiences, right? From different perspectives, color choices, and styles. How do these concepts relate to the Knight Foundation prototype grants? Well, they capture the wonderful synergy of bringing people together, capturing their ideas, allowing everyone free expression. They're cheap. You know? We can do them over lunch, right? Not worrying about perfection. We're not doodle elegance, I call it. And instead, we're worried about exploration and discovery, sharing the wonder of our inner child, right? That lurks within each of us. As you think about your potential prototypes and ideas for the future, and I didn't get this in the note cards if someone wants to type it, but there was a study, and I try to remember the name of it. It's one of these numbers, and it's a study of 5-year-olds. They asked 5-year-olds, what's your dream for the future? And the 5-year-olds drew all kinds of amazing things, and they were things that are not possible today, okay? So they were great dreams of the future. They were really had technological sophistication, but from a 5-year-old's perspective. And we learned so much from that. Do you know that? And when I watch that video, I get so excited because then I realize there are things that I can do to participate. Okay? And thank you, Gentle, because I couldn't get all that in the note card. And I can come up with that video for you sometime. But it's just the notion that we have all these ideas. Anytime you've criticized an interface, anytime you've said, boy, it'd be nice if it did this, you know, or if it supported me this way, those are opportunities for using media in new ways to think about how our software integrates with media and how we share ideas, right? So I want you guys to think of yourselves as co-creators. Hey, Stranger has something cool here. The movie actress Hedy Lamarr came up with the World War II radar detection. Absolutely. On a napkin. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Stranger. And the reason I bring that up, Janelle, I'm so glad you added that. You know, often people feel powerless. Yeah, I love that, Janelle. I was just wearing a Star Trek uniform before I changed clothes. But the idea here is that we are not bounded by our physical limitations based on our job, you know, our view of ourselves, our personal power when it comes to global influence. But media has this way of opening doors, right? It has a way of reaching people, you know, and of course empowering the powerless. And I'm not saying we're powerless, but I'm saying sometimes we feel powerless about certain things. Like we think, I have to settle for this interface, or I have to settle for whatever exists because I can't do it myself. But we could encourage others through these prototypes. We could put together a call to action for things, ways of improving pieces of our world. And I think that would be really exciting. Your ideas matter. Think of how certain populations benefit or currently fail to benefit from media, whether it's through co-production. See, this notion that we can all be producers of media. We're not just kicking it into cruise control and consuming it. We're actually creating. That's a very powerful thought. Yes, Jacques, we can reach so many different kinds of people. I saw a grant on the Knight Foundation for Instagram for millennials, and personally I thought to myself, what is it that they need? Why do they need a project for Instagram for millennials. I thought they lived there, Isn't that awful? So obviously there's something they needed that I wasn't aware of. So what do elders need? I know we have quite a few elders in our organization, people who are very wise, who have experience. And now we're seeing the aging of the baby boomers, right? We're seeing a monster population, a large population of people all maturing. And not all of them are necessarily engaged through media or able to reach out. People like us, we may not resemble a high percentage of the baby boomer market. And I'm thinking to myself, how can we reach them? And how can we empower them to have a stronger voice? It's just the thoughts. These are just ideas for you. I hope you've enjoyed this session. And yes, this is a quickie assembled moment, but it's really a synergistic opportunity for us to get together and think about our ideas, for each of you to submit in little groups and think about how you can help shape the world. Thanks.
And there's still a few more slides on my side that just are more about some of the logistics of questions and things about the thing itself. But thanks, Lear, for going deeper into that about prototypes. And I think the key there is that don't be daunted by this process. This is probably one of the most informal, flexible grant calls that often come up, or that don't often come up, I should say. So if you have an idea, I would say definitely submit it. So let's go on a little bit, and let me get my speakeasy. So, and as Lear was saying, that prototyping is really kind of this learning through making. And on the Knight Foundation side of things, they're really focused, more focused on the presentation of art than education. So if you've got a purely education idea in your mind, that isn't as directly related in their thing. So, but the in between of how arts and how arts education and technology fit together would be. So connecting people to art in those ways. So they're not looking for a purely educational or some sort of curriculum or that kind of thing. And another question to ask yourself: are you doing something that uses tech in a way that arts orgs can learn from? Again, that arts thing, that arts list that we talked about before. So even if it isn't like she was talking about in the Instagram idea, even if it isn't, and it doesn't have to be revolving around virtual environments or anything like that, but even if it's some sort of thing, like how does it relate back to, is it something that arts orgs can learn from, even if it's more broadly applicable to other things? And can it focus on how, or I was going to say, it can focus on how new tech can disrupt existing models of knowledge. Say, instead of looking at something from a top-down perspective on how something might be done, to more of a collaborative or shared knowledge. So here's where it may not even necessarily be a technology thing in the end that you're actually proposing. It may be some knowledge sharing or some overarching best practice that could be used in the art space. And this is about testing new things and making new things. So whether it's a process, whether that's a technology piece, and before, as I said, new things could be the next part of a thing too. So if you are working on a project that you think there could be a next phase prototype to, that also still applies. It doesn't have to be brand new. And then the who can apply. So anyone in the U.S., the Knight Foundation does have target cities and states that they normally, those communities that they usually work with in these particular art funded things. So if you are from one of those target cities, and I'll look them up in a second to give you those, it will have more weight. But any projects that you're thinking on a broader impact that's able to be replicated, those are also good. So it doesn't have to be like the idea of, back to that Instagram and technology idea. That doesn't really matter where you are, right? Place is not a thing. Or if we're talking about virtual environments like we're all in here, places where the actual museum or art facility or user and person is doesn't matter, because we're all meeting in a sort of third virtual place, right? Oops. Don't click my thing. So, and okay. So it should connect or apply to an arts or cultural organization. As I said, visual arts, fine arts, music, performing, dance, theater, film, whether that be on an organizational, institutional side, or even if on an art side, or how people can interface or get more from those sort of things. That also works. And it could be an idea for a new startup or tech solution within the arts. So certainly if you've got an idea, that's okay. And it could be someone from an arts, music, cultural org if you directly work with one or work for one, if you want to focus on something that's applying to your field. Literature too, I think. I mean, your best thing is, and we'll get to it later. There's a contact information for the grant, the arts director at the Knight Foundation, and that video that I referenced early on. I might say like some of the specific things, like they did bring up cultural orgs that are a bit more broader, and it, I think is if it applies back, that if there's an idea that kind of can also apply to the arts sort of thing, that, but you might want to ask a specific, if you're thinking about that. So if you're not an arts org, how does your project fit in with this, and how can you partner with this arts orgs? So that's another way around it too. If you think that your idea, that you want to partner with somebody, then that might actually yeah, somebody brought up public spaces as well. That's another, a lot of what, like I said, a lot of this comes from that about hour-long Q&A they had. So I would advise you to kind of watch through that if you really want to sort of see some of the questions and things that were asked there. So what projects are not eligible for funding? This is the other side of this, of course. So they are not funding academic research. So if it's purely some academic research that you're trying to do, or they're not. This is really about making things. Though there are no restrictions on if you do work on a prototype project for them, you certainly can publish that work out. There's no restraints there. So yes, not funding any sort of research, even arts research, Lear. Like they're not looking for a research specific project. And then,
well, they did say they'll accept research, but not formal research. So
yes.
Think of it as discovery as opposed to the formalism of an IRB. And, in other words, they're not trying to replicate what research grants try to do, and NSF, etc. They're really trying to think about people getting together and discovering, or creating something, or, and of course the connection with media, the arts, but they do have journalism, because all of these communities they're talking about are where their newspapers used to service or currently service, whichever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And those are those targeted communities that I brought up. So they're also not funding proprietary projects. So any software that is proprietary, or any technology that wouldn't be able to be released under a Creative Commons or open source licensing, is not eligible. So they're looking at they're looking for their grant funded work that can be shared. So think of that, like obviously when we talk about here in Second Life, you wouldn't be able to sort of use Second Life in and of itself as a tool because obviously that's proprietary. That's an example, right? But something like Open Simulator, if you were building off of that, now granted that's a, or using it as a piece of it, that's already open source. That is replicatable and shareable by anybody in a standalone kind of way. So that, if you're thinking about something virtual world environment wise, that's an example there, right? So Creative Commons would focus around anything that is released that is, media or publications or those kind of things. Any of the shareable stuff that comes out of it that isn't like technology. The technology stuff would be an open source thing. Um, and they're also not funding content only projects, which means you can't say I've got this idea to build this, right? Like if the virtual environment angle, you're not going to build something. The project isn't going to be just focused around just purely building things. The example that they gave, so they wouldn't be able to fund an exhibition per se, right? Or projects like that directly, but if there was content, but it's okay if there is content creation that happens during the process of the prototyping while you're creating and testing things. um, so and further to that, so they're not funding building another example, they wouldn't fund building a media series, but they could fund a project and how could tech make the interaction of media more available. So if you, even if you're interested in creating, or if you think content should be an important part of it, you have to kind of think about how you're talking about and approaching the project. So it's really a piece, but it's not that core of creating content specifically. So, and then Marley, in your case, I think I'm going to use you as an example for a second. The work that you do, your process, right? That is an exceptionally original thing, right? And you're using a virtual space in that way. And there is content that might come out of the end results of what happens, but the content's really not the important thing. It's really the process and what's going on that's important. And that's what matters to them, right? The idea of whatever the thing is you're prototyping is the key thing, even if there's content that gets made along the way. So that's, I think that's a good kind of uh, in the virtual environments example. So, and what is the Knight Foundation themselves funding and thinking about right now? Um, and these are a few things that they mentioned in that video. So they are they brought up Carnegie museums and a particular project where they're using chatbots and SMS to connect with new audiences. So in that case, Lear brought up the Instagram. This is like, how do you use a technology like that to kind of integrate, right? They brought up the Barnes Foundation, where they're using AI for analyzing their collections and building this kind of metadata database for artworks in their collection, and they're sort of tagging them around things like light and color and line, and these things that maybe aren't normally the tags and the that would be associated. Like they might be have originally been tagged by like who created them and more just standard data things. So tagging them in this way, and then they're actually, I think they said they created kind of a web searchable utility to be able to then find artwork via those things rather than just who the artist was, or when it was made, or those kind of more standard data points. So they also said that they are thinking about things like AR, which is augmented reality, mixed reality, and sort of looking at things in new ways. So we definitely here in this virtual environment, I think there's a lot of crossover there that we can think about. They're looking at the participatory nature of the web and how do we develop a different relationship with audiences. Again, they're thinking arts. So what audience means in that case, either a viewer or somebody that's part of a performance or coming to see that or that kind of thing. They're also thinking of course, about multimedia related things, the Internet of Things. So, how can you connect sensors and things like Arduinos? But they're also like thinking about low as well as high tech. They're thinking about low tech as well. So what, and I think I didn't go ahead. What Lear was bringing up in regards to even like on the back of a napkin, this paper prototyping idea, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to result in like some technology that has something to do like AI or more advanced things like that. So they are also open to many things that they're not even thinking about yet. So so whether that's this kind of gives you that opportunity, and whether it's something pragmatic or wildly out of the box, like they're fine with seeing those ideas too. So if you have something that you're like, well, this really fits into what they're talking about it, but it's really out there, you can don't feel afraid to submit that as well, as long as I think it's falling within the other parameters that they're talking about, being within the arts and kind of pairing technology with it. Yes, art in space, right? So this little quote came from the person who led the webinar, who actually is the director of arts at the Knight Foundation, that their goal is to connect people to the arts. Like that's really the core of all of this. And I'm putting his info here. He gave the email address, which is also on a Knight Foundation site, but he gave the email address out within the webinar that they held for the questions, and invited people to email him and ask him questions. So I would encourage you the same way too. I would say if you have more questions, I would watch that video in the beginning, and I'll put the link in again, because I think if that will give you like deeper context here, and then from that, if you've got more questions that are specifically, here's my idea, what do you think, or questions around a specific thing, then he did welcome people to email him. And here's all the kind of info on submitting. So prototypefund.org is the URL. The deadline to submit again is 11:59. Oops, I started my thing again. Deadline to submit is 11:59 on March 6th, which is Tuesday, as we said, and the winners get announced in May. Let me give that link again for the video and also for these slides. Here is the video you can watch. It is using Flash, so if you don't have Flash installed on your browser, you would have to do that to watch it. And here is the link to the kind of the page that's got the call for proposals, and the link to the recording is also off of there, as well as the Apply Now button. And I don't know if anybody has any questions, or if you want to brainstorm a little bit for ideas. We have a couple minutes, and then we can do kind of a quick open mic. But it's a pretty exciting call, I think, because the fact that you can really sort of talk about these beginning ideas, and as I said, it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be submitting this from an organization. You can be submitting this as an individual. You can be submitting this as, even a for-profit company, as long as whatever you're releasing is going to be, as long as whatever comes out in the end is going to be shareable and open source, or open source. So, yep. There's lots of cool, and I would say, look at what they have funded in the general. They've done lots of challenges in the past. This is slightly different than what they normally do. Some of the broader challenges they've done, it started out this way, where they ask people to submit ideas, and then it's actually some of those broader ones. Then they go out to it gets narrowed down by people coming to the site. They kind of do an open sort of call for comments, and kind of not really voting, but comments and feedback on proposals on the site. Normally they're challenges, and then from there they kind of get narrowed down and voted on. This is a little different, where you're really you really kind of have a channel directly into the the arts side of the Knight Foundation, where normally they're just working with their communities that are, as Lear said, were uh, were in locations that the the Knight family newspapers were in. So this is a broader call. So it's kind of cool in that way that you have sort of this still this sort of in to submitting this directly to the art director and the arts folks of Knight, even if it's broader beyond those uh, those home communities they normally work with. So, but I don't know. Do folks have ideas? And I would say, even when we're talking about team wise too, there's a lot of people here. So think about even the other people here if you've got an idea, if there are folks that you can collaborate with. There's certainly a lot of inter strengths or, strengths that with this collaboration, I think, with various people here could then make it that much cooler. And if there are folks that are here that are directly part of arts orgs, then look to those people too, to collaborate with or bounce ideas off of. So, any thoughts, questions? And Gentle put in chat for me too, where their communities are. I'll just paste that here. Yeah, yes, it absolutely is. And also for you, and for anyone else who's in Europe, it was asked in the call, like, can somebody who's international submit? And directly, no. But if they're open to the idea that if there's somebody with an idea that applies broader, and that there are collaborators or partners that are international, that is okay. So ultimately that idea has to be able to be replicated and used and shared, within the U.S., because that's what Knight Foundation's purview is. But there's nothing stopping collaborating with or partnering with somebody who's international. So folks that are in the audience that's another way to kind of get involved if there are others submitting ideas, to kind of come up with a team or partner with some US folks. Second Life as a location, I doubt it, Marley. I mean, again, because they're looking at something shareable, I mean, it could, I think if you're talking about the process itself, I would say you would focus on the process, and in that application, you talk about how that happens in a virtual environment, and that, but in the case of your situation, but like say Second Life, like if you're talking about the process and that's the key innovation here, then it doesn't really matter what virtual world it happens in, as long as that world has the capability to have on-demand content building and stuff like that, right? So that's a way to talk about your work without penning it to Second Life. But I would say whatever then happens, it would probably have to be more associated with Open Simulator. If it's going to be truly distributable, even with, say, some examples behind it. But if it's just the process, I would say that's a little broader, because your process, like, it could also relate to even in person or through other digital mediums, as long as there's still the ability to be able to live visualize, right? So you can think on that idea that, that's really the key thing for you, is that process part, I think. And whether it's in a virtual world, or whether people are drawing things and showing them on webcams, or whether that, whatever that is, is it the end of the technology? And if it is part of the building piece of it that you think is the important piece too, I would, and you're going to mention that, I would probably focus on mentioning Open Simulator, just because it is open source, and you can point to that as already being open source. Yeah. But I mean, I think what you have is great, because it is so this, and there's others obviously here too. But and it's not that hard. 6 questions, 200 words. They're really just kind of looking for that idea. It's not a full grant proposal, so that you might see. what a few of us did behind the scenes for another proposal a couple weeks ago that we just finished up. So there's, it's not as onerous as that. And I would say, but definitely yes, collaboration I think is good between folks here. So, oh, that's something else. We didn't. That wasn't for this, Marley. That was for another thing that Dancers was working on, a much more formal grant. Um, But that being said, there's nothing stopping, like, if folks want to have in the next few days, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's something that Wisdom, we could do it on your side of things if there's some time over the weekend or something. If folks want to get together and have like a brainstorm meetup and talk about collaboration or on ways to come together for some good ideas. And again, you can submit multiple ideas, so you can put whatever out there, but we can have follow up in that way. I think, like, kind of um, a brainstorm for ideas. If folks are interested, we can chat about that maybe during mentors. Um, any other questions or things that we missed along the way uh, while we were talking? If not, I would say uh, there's a.
Yeah. You may have responded, but I didn't get it. These trainings that are required, I'm assuming, they would happen in those geographical areas, but not online.
I imagine they would actually, yeah, they would be sending you to one of those Knight Foundation offices.
I see. Okay.
But I mean, but that doesn't mean for folks that would be harder for. If you're collaborating with a group or a team, not everybody would have to go, right? So that's a way around it as well. If say the idea of traveling to a place wouldn't be quite as able, So I think as long as some part of your team can do that, and they'll probably take you through that. And there's lots of ways. I think, speaking from my own experience with, like, remotely working for many years, even as part of teams in that way, there's ways to include people if they have the ability to, like, video call in folks during the process, or and often there's like time for people to brainstorm. I'm not sure exactly what the format of their training is, but either way, even if you're part of a team that there isn't a good way for them to bring you in during that training, I'm sure they still could kind of come back and share it. It didn't make it sound like everybody had to be there, So
and is the training free, or are you expected to pay a fee for it?
I would imagine it'd be free. It's part of the funding, I think. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily. I'm not sure if it's part of lumped in with the $50,000. I don't think it's that case, but I think it's part of their process, right? They bring people through to one of the offices, and then they would lead that, And I imagine they probably gauge where people are located, how they distribute that.
Okay.
Yeah. But I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't let it bother you as long as some folks in the idea or the team you're kind of building can go. So, can we propose a decentralized shared prosperity platform based on blockchain? And I think as long as you can connect that to arts, and you had some US contributors, like you would have to kind of come up with you would have to, I think, state a defined, like, how could, even if it's a broadly useful technology idea, Jacques, you'd have to probably have a good idea of how that would definitively benefit in the arts as well, which there are some of the SDGs that kind of fall in that very well. So and SDGs, for people that are need that refresher, there's the chart of the SDGs right on the floor in front of the feet of Lyra and I. So I'm going to move to an open mic. Before I do, and I'll say this in text chat as well, this is next week's presentation, which is very heady, I give you, but super important. I will kind of get a blurb or text for that too. But it really impacts any of us who interact, even though it's an EU law that comes online in a couple months, it impacts any of us that interact with or have data about or outreach to or market to anybody in the EU. And so even if you've just got folks in your group, so yeah. And I'll get a blurb too, Gentle. I have one up that I'll grab. Super important, even if it is really law heavy. So hopefully I can concise it down, and I think we'll probably have to build upon it, because there's probably some best practices that'll have to happen between now and May is when the deadline for this is, that the EU, any interactions with anybody, any person within the EU has to comply with, is like May 25th, I think. So there's probably a lot of things that will result from this. So think of it as definitely a work in progress that we'll have to kind of keep learning some things to help us with how we can comply with this. So and thank you, Lear. I'm going to drop off voice, and if you've got anything to share, I think Marley, you have your thing that's coming up, right? And LV, if you want, share too.
Hey, sorry, I was answering questions in another channel. Yes, thanks. It was a great session, and I learned so much about the Knight Foundation prototypes. Lori Vaughn, over to you.